Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster Diode wiring kit on a 2022 Chevy Spark. Now I have the hazards on my RV, and you can see it's mimicking on the taillights of our vehicle. And if you've ever seen a flat-toed vehicle before, sometimes you may notice they have those magnetic lights that are on here, and that means you're draping a wire all the way up to the front. Now they have wireless options as well, but that's one more component that you have to tag along with all of the rest of your equipment, where diode wiring really makes it easy to just plug into the front. You're also going to get some 12-volt power supply generally from a 6-pole, so it's really nice to be able to just plug in and have these ready to go. And what it's going to do is just run from the 7-pole on your RV through the 6-pole, and you're going to have wire running back to your taillights where you tie into diodes, and that way you can mimic your running lights, your brake lights, as well as your turn signals, and that's going to keep you safe and legal and let the people behind you know what you're indicating to do. Now it's pretty easy. You are going to be pulling your taillight out and then tying into that factory wiring, and it's just a couple spade connectors that you'll be attaching, and really the hardest part is running your wire all the way up to the front of the vehicle. And depending on your braking system, you may want to run a little bit of extra wire up into the engine bay where it all meets at the front at your 6-pole. Now this is where it plugs in to get the lighting function, but this does not come with the kit, so you are going to need to pick up a 6-pole. Sometimes your tow bar will actually come with them. Our Roadmaster Nighthawk came with our 6-pole, so we used that one, but with that umbilical it's just going to transfer all the way up to your 7-pole on the RV, and again you're just going to get those lighting functions. So a nice quick easy way to just plug in and your taillights will be working and without having to fumble with any of those magnetic lights. Now as far as installation goes, it's not terribly hard to do. You are going to be tying again into your wiring, so if you're not super comfortable with that, I'll walk you through all of it, and it's not too terribly difficult. Now the trickiest part I found is honestly just running it under the vehicle, and I highly recommend if you're doing your base plate on your Spark, your front fascia is going to have to come off anyway. You want to run that wiring while you have the fascia off, that way you can get it nice and clean. Now speaking of that installation, let's take this into the shop and I'll show you how to do it. Now when running your diode wiring, it's always important to make sure that you have enough excess, because otherwise hooking up can get pretty tricky. So you're going to take your spool of the 4 wires that are all together, and we're going to start here where we're going to mount eventually our 6-pole. And I just tape an extra length here, that way it's easier to tie in. And then from here I just kind of followed our base plate up and made my way into the engine bay. Now in the engine bay, I've pulled an extra loop of wire here because some of your braking systems, as far as the InvisiBrake like we're installing here today, as well as like your stay and play duos, they tie into the diode wiring, and honestly it's not a bad thing to have just a little extra wire just in case. But what I've done, you can see this is now 3 wires, is I peeled our white wire back all the way until this ground here, and I cut the wire and I put a ring terminal on here using this factory ground. And the wires have to get grounded somewhere, so it's nice to be able to use a factory one and know that it's going to work, but it's also twofold, and that's because I was able to salvage quite a bit of extra wire, which we're going to use later to jump between our taillights. So from here I just kind of routed my wire back and down through the tunnel of the engine bay and the firewall, and I'm going to head underneath the vehicle and show you where I went from there. Now underneath the vehicle, I've gone ahead and just routed our wire down, and the main thing that we're trying to avoid when running our wire back is going to be any exhaust, because it's going to burn the wire, any suspension that might pinch or scuff the wire up, and just really anything that's moving. So the main thing I try to do is follow some of the factory wiring, as it's generally in a safe location. So as I tuck this down, there is a sway bar here, so I've used some of the factory wiring again to kind of tie that into place to keep it up out of the way, then made my way over this cross member and just used these brackets here where we have our hard line set, and our wire just kind of sits in some of these. I ran a few zip ties here and there just to kind of keep it in place, and then as we routed back up over the fuel tank here, zip tied up to the bracket, and then made my way over. And at this point I have my wires splitting. I zip tied them up to this bracket. So you can see my yellow and brown here. This is going to be our running light and left turn signal. So I ran this through the bumper beam, which is nice and wide open, and made my way over here. My green is going to be for my right turn signal, so I'm going to leave this here. Get our taillights taken out, and these are just going to be a Phillips head screw. We'll go ahead and get our taillight out. Now, these do have little prongs generally that plop into some rubber, so you may need to just kind of wobble it back and forth a little bit until they get knocked loose. There we go. So if you're struggling, you can see there's those two prongs, they just pop into those. So if you need to, you can kind of pry on these back ends, just be careful. Now, as far as our taillight, just to make this a little bit easier and have more space, these are all just quarter turns. So you can go ahead and get the bulbs taken out. And we'll set this aside. And we need to determine which one is going to be the brake and turn signal light. Now, I've already gone ahead and tested, and it's going to be our red wire. So I'm going to go ahead and grab all of our tools and our diodes, and we'll start making our attachment points. Now we need to get our wire. We have our brown and our yellow that's going to be down there, and we need to get that pulled up. So I'm going to just pass an airline tube down. Now if you don't have an airline tube at home, you can use a string with a nut attached to it or tied onto it, basically enough to pass this down, and that way we can get a hand on it and tie our wires to it, making it a lot easier to pull this up. So I'm just going to go ahead, take our wires, and then I'm just going to tape it to our airline tube. So now we'll go ahead and get this pulled up. And we're probably going to have an extra bit of wire here, which is totally fine. We'll be cutting this down here. So really, I mean, this is an excess amount, so we'll just cut this to kind of get it out of the way. And we're also going to be passing up that extra white wire that we saved from cutting that off and mounting it to our ground. I'm going to go ahead and take one end and just kind of start passing that down. So if you need to, you can pass that fish wire back up and pull it down, but this is going to make our jumper wire for our running lights. So this brown wire is going to attach to that, and this is going to go to the other side of the vehicle. But we do need this wire to be able to make that connection. So I have my three wires here that we're going to be attaching. We're going to need to tie into our red wire here. So I'm going to just cut that, and I go a little bit further back, and that way we don't have our diodes right here. Sometimes it can get kind of tricky to fit all this in with those taillights. So we'll go ahead and just strip both ends back. And then go ahead and grab one of the diodes. And these spade connectors are how we're going to make our connection. So you can pull these off. And I'm going to go ahead and get both sides of the red wire crimped down, and then we can make our first connection. Now with all of these connections, you also want to kind of just double check by giving it a quick tug. They're pretty small wires, and you can see right there I crimped it down, yet it's still pulled out. So you don't want to trace loose wires. So just make sure that you really have it crimped down and that it's nice and snug. Much better. Take our wires here, and we're going to have car brake out, and our out is going to go to the output, which is going to be our bulb here, and we're going to put that there, and then our car brake in is going to connect that, so that way our factory wiring is just passing through. So we're going to need to make the rest of our connections, which are going to be the RV tail and RV brake, and that's going to be accomplished using these wires here. We also have our ground wire, and so in the kit you're going to have this small bundle of white wire, and that's going to get attached to a factory ground, which we're going to probably create here by drilling in with the self-tapping screw. So if you want to, you can go ahead and get this peeled back. You can also strip your other wires. And we're going to go ahead and put a ring terminal here. And I'm going to go ahead and get this mounted in place. Now this is a pretty tight spot because of the way that the tail light goes, but a nice, easy, for sure spot that it's going to fit. It's going to be right about here. So I'm going to go ahead and get this mounted in place, and then we can kind of determine our wire length. So run your self tapper in. You want it tight to where this isn't going to spin around, and that metal biting into the factory metal will create a nice grounding point. I'm going to leave this wire at its own length. It should be fine. So I'll go ahead, strip this back, and we can get our spade terminal put on there. And that's a nice easy connection. That's going to go to our ground. Made some of the attachments, so we have our ground here. Our RV brake is going to be our yellow. Our RV tail, this is where we're going to have to get a little bit crafty. So I cut off a little extra length of our white wire that we passed, and we're going to plug this in here. And then I'm going to be taking a butt connector that's included in the kit and attaching it to our brown wire and that white wire. So this is the white wire that's jumping over to our other one, and that way we can have the connection between the two lights. And also the gauge of wire is just not possible to get both of them put in there. So this is kind of our workaround for that. So we'll get this crimped down. And then we'll take both of our wires here and just kind of get these twisted up. And then we'll get these in the butt connector. So now with this jumble of wires here, we're going to want to kind of clean this up a bit. Take my tail light, and we're going to get everything, all our bulbs back in place. And we're going to see, as far as clearance goes, kind of where this needs to sit. And it looks like this portion of the light, we might be able to stick our diode on there. But the main thing is we don't want stress on our wires, because over time these can pull out of these spade connectors. So I'm going to go ahead, throw Aluma tape here just around this. That way it's going to hold that nice and tight for us. And then we should be able to tuck everything down and get our light back in place. I've gone ahead and pulled up our white jumper wire as well as our green over here, and I've made my attachments. So just like the other one, we have our red wire, so that's going to make it nice and easy for us to remember. And then we have our white ground, which I've attached. And then our color change here is going to be our RV brake is going to be green, and then our RV tail is going to be white, which is still technically that brown. Made all those connections there. I put my tape here, so we'll get our taillight back in place. And we'll zip tie any extra wire that we have underneath. And then once we get our plug up front, we'll just need to test it to make sure it's working. I have my fascia back on. We can get ready to mount up our 6-pole. Now we have our 4 diode wires here. I also have this black wire, which is going to be an indicator light that's going to pass through the umbilical to the RV and eventually light up an indicator light that's going to let the driver of the RV know when the brakes are being applied. So you may or may not have that depending on your braking system. Now the 6-pole does not come obviously with the kit, so when choosing a tow bar, you might want to find one that has this included. Otherwise you can pick these up separately. So pretty easy to do here. We have these terminals, and then you just back those out with a small Phillips. Now don't go all the way out, because if these fall out, they are really tricky to find. So what we'll do here is take the boot that was on here, and we're just going to run our wires through there. And just kind of push this back for now, and then we're just going to strip back each of these wires here, and then using that screw, once they're stripped back, the strip portion will go in there. We'll just tighten that down, and I'll run you through which each of them are. You can see that there are letters that are embossed. It's kind of hard to see because the screw's in the way, but that will go accordingly to where the wires are going to go, and I'll show you where they need to be. Holding our plug here at our 12 o'clock position, we're going to see that it says TM, and that's going to be tail markers. So that's going to be our brown for our running lights. Now as we go around here, we see GD, which is going to be ground. That's going to be our white. LT is going to be left turn signal, and that's going to be yellow. Then we're going to have our RT, which is right turn signal, which is green. And then this one here is S. And again, this is just going to be for our signal that we're passing up to that indicator light. Your center post, if you are doing a charge line, that way you can charge your battery as you flat tow, you're going to be running it in that center section, and generally that's going to be your 12-volt power source. Now before we cap this up, I'm going to go ahead and put some dielectric grease here and just coat this all up. And this is just going to kind of keep moisture from breaking down any of our connections over time. This does live on the front of a vehicle, so if you're driving in all kinds of weather, it's going to see that here on the plug. And granted, it is all capped up, but again, just a little added protection here. So with that coated on, we're going to go ahead and take our boot, slide that on, and I'm going to take my wire loom that I had here, just kind of tuck this in, and then I'm going to take some electrical tape and just wrap this all up so it's a nice watertight seal, just giving us a little bit more protection as well. Now with this all taped up, we can go ahead and get this lined up with our posts, and we're just taking our self-tapping screws, and we can hand thread these in for now, just kind of hold it, and then as we tighten it down, that should cinch it in place. Now you don't need to get too crazy here. This is plastic, so you don't want to crack it. So just until that's nice and flush. We're going to run through our light sequence to test it. I'm using a test box that's going to simulate hooking up to our RV. We're going to start here with our running lights. Next we'll do our left turn signal, then our right turn signal, and then finally our brakes. And that was a look and installation of the Roadmaster diode wiring kit for towed vehicles on a 2022 Chevrolet Spark.